Rome, the eternal city. The city to which all roads lead. Nestled within the heart of Rome, a stone's throw from the banks of the river Tiber, is one of civilization's greatest treasures. One of the most remarkable places on Earth. It is the home of the Pope, the center of the Roman Catholic faith, the site of Christendom's grandest church and holiest shrine. It is the Vatican, and it is a realm all its own. A city within a city, a country within a country, a place where the human and the divine almost touch one another. For almost 2,000 years, the Vatican has played a role of monumental importance on the world stage. It is a place cloaked in both majesty and mystery. A place of glory and power. A place where the boundary between legend and fact often blurs. A world that is often seen, but seldom revealed. St. Peter's Square, gateway to the Vatican. A gateway through which millions of people pass each year. Entering St. Peter's Square means crossing an international boundary, the boundary separating Italy from the Vatican. Vatican City is an independent and sovereign nation. Sheltered within ancient stone walls, it measures just 108 acres, smaller than the grounds of the U.S. Capitol building. But over the past 2 millennia, this tiny patch of hallowed ground has changed the course of human history. The Vatican is a world apart, a separate realm. It is a realm where past and present coexist. A realm where religious faith and political might go hand in hand. Where vows of poverty are taken amid the most lavish collection of art and architecture in all of Western civilization. The Vatican's vast piazza, St. Peter's Square, is one of the world's great crossroads. Here, religious pilgrims, tourists, and young lovers mingle, encircled by the arms of a great stone colonnade. It is the front doorstep of the Pope, one of the most powerful people on earth. Just beyond the columned walls of the piazza is the Sistine Chapel. The chapel is the home of the world's most famous frescoes, dazzling scenes painted by Michelangelo. It is also the setting for the ancient, secret, and closely guarded ritual of electing the Pope. These colorfully clad Swiss guards are the tiny army of the Vatican. Created 5 centuries ago as the Pope's personal bodyguard, the Swiss Guard numbers barely 100. Their weapons, their visible weapons that is, date back to the time of the Renaissance, as do their purple and gold uniforms. Here, within St. Peter's Basilica, the holiest rites of the Roman Catholic Church are held. St. Peter's is the grandest church on earth. The basilica's mighty dome, a marvel of engineering and construction, was Michelangelo's final achievement. But the Vatican's greatest treasure of all is a grave beneath the basilica's floor. Long before the great basilica was built, some 1900 years ago, legend holds that St. Peter himself was buried on this spot. Without Peter, his inspiring life and his moving death, the Vatican's power and glory would not exist. The Vatican would be just another jumble of Roman ruins.
The Catholic Church in many ways is built on the foundation of Peter as the common person, yet who's able to rise above his circumstances to show his deep faith. People today know and like Peter because he's like all of us. He was a simple fisherman. He was married at one time. He was very generous and loyal, yet he also had those great human frailties and weaknesses which we all have. He sinned. He turned his back on Christ. Oftentimes he had losses of faith, but in the end, he was the great martyr of Christ.
But how did a humble fisherman inspire the grandeur of the Vatican? To understand the Vatican of today, we must first understand the Rome of nearly 2,000 years ago. It was a mighty metropolis, nearly 1 million people strong, when Peter arrived to spread the gospel of Jesus and establish a church. Rome ruled the greatest empire the world had ever seen. An advanced civilization of brilliant engineers and builders, of mighty armies, powerful rulers, and a cornucopia of religions, dozens of deities imported from Egypt, Greece, and other lands conquered by Rome. Amid so many religions, one more might have seemed a trivial addition. But the Christian Church soon set itself apart from the rest. Roman law demanded that the emperor be worshipped as a god, but the new Christians refused to obey that law. Their defiance infuriated Rome's most infamous emperor, Nero. Nero was popular with Rome's lower classes. He kept them entertained with chariot races and bloody battles between gladiators. But then a disaster struck Rome, destroying Nero's popularity and most of the empire's capital.
The fire that breaks out in July of '64 is an event which does turn a number of Romans against him. Nearly a third of the city was totally destroyed. Another third was severely damaged. Rome was used to fires, was used to calamitous fires, but nothing like this.
Instead of rebuilding housing for those whose homes had burned, Nero began erecting a huge palace for himself. Soon, angry rumors swept Rome. Rumors that Nero had set the fire himself. To shift the blame, Nero sought a scapegoat. He found one in the Christians. They had set the fire, he said. Nero sent soldiers from house to house. The persecution of Christians had begun.
They were rounded up and they were executed. Some of them were used as human torches, tied to posts and covered with oil and set afire to light an evening banquet conducted by Nero.
The grand finale to this spectacle of cruelty took place in what was known as Nero's Circus, a sports arena located near the spot where St. Peter's Basilica stands today. At the center of Nero's arena stood this very monument, an ancient Egyptian obelisk. Peter and his followers were led into the arena in chains. Around the obelisk, legend holds, they were nailed to crosses. Peter's cross stood upside down.
The Romans wanted their punishments to be exemplary. The idea was to make the experience as not only as painful, but as humiliating as possible.
But early Christian tradition held that it was not humiliation, but humility, Peter's humility, that inspired his manner of crucifixion.
Of course, St. Peter was crucified upside down. He said he was not worthy to die as our Lord died on the cross. He was crucified upside down in Nero's circus, probably gazing upon this obelisk here.
In the shadow of the ancient obelisk, Peter's body was taken down from the cross and hidden in a pagan shrine. The shrine was located in a cemetery on a rise above the arena, an area called Vaticanus. The original meaning of the name is lost in the mists of history, but over time, the name would acquire a powerful new significance. Whispered by the pilgrims who began making their way to Peter's shrine, gradually Vaticanus, a Roman suburb, became the Vatican, sacred resting place of Peter. Modern-day pilgrims are welcomed with open arms, but early believers risked death. For 2.5 centuries after Peter's crucifixion, Christianity was outlawed. Despite the dangers, a series of leaders stepped in to fill the shoes of Peter. Bishops, the leaders were called, and soon many cities in the empire had a church and a bishop. But in Rome, the final post of Peter, the bishop gradually acquired a title of additional respect, Il Papa, Holy Father, Pope. The popes were leaders of an underground religion in more ways than one. The catacombs, Rome's vast network of subterranean tombs, became a safe haven, a place where open expressions of Christianity were tolerated. There, chapels were hewn in the soft rock, where martyrs and popes were buried. Believers painted frescoes and chiseled inscriptions to honor the Christian dead. Even amid persecution, the ranks of the church were growing. By the beginning of the 4th century, the footsteps of the faithful had worn a path to the Vatican, site of Peter's clandestine burial. Christianity remained an outlaw religion. But then, in the year 312, came an event that would transform the Hill of Vaticanus from a humble shrine into the center of the world stage. The Roman Empire was torn by a tug-of-war between two bitter rivals. Constantine, who ruled Roman Britain, and Maxentius, who reigned in Rome. After 6 years of skirmishing, Constantine approached Rome for a showdown with Maxentius. Constantine prayed for help to his god, the pagan god of the sun. His prayer was answered, he later said, by a shining cross high in the sky. Beside it, these words, "By this sign you shall conquer."
Constantine took an oath that he and the entire army had seen this sign. Some people say this was a solar halo, but at any rate, he had them paint this Christian symbol on their shields. That's how they prepared to confront Maxentius. As a Christian army, an army fighting under the Christian symbol, Maxentius suffers total defeat. His army is thrown back, they're slaughtered. Maxentius himself is thrown, fully armored, into the river Tyre, where he drowns.
Whether he saw a solar halo or a sign from the Almighty, Constantine gave the credit to the Christian God. In gratitude, he ended the empire's war on Christianity.
Although Constantine killed his sons, his wife, was a butcher, a vulgar, disgusting man, but still, he allowed Christianity not to be persecuted. Without that, it would have been ongoing dark ages chaos, civil wars, deaths, killings, no morals, no check and balance, nothing, right? Without Christianity, the world would not have survived.
Most important, the emperor himself became a Christian. He showered the church with money, land, and gifts. His crowning achievement was a vast basilica, the world's biggest church, to honor Peter's memory. Here, on the hill of Vaticanus, where new St. Peter's stands today, Constantine built the first St. Peter's, Old St. Peter's. Its location was a builder's nightmare, but a symbolic pronouncement of stupendous power.
He was convinced St. Peter was buried at this spot. There used to be a hill that used to go up almost as high to the right as the church stands today. And Constantine, in the year 324, instead of building a basilica at the base of the hill or over there, wanted to build it right there at the spot where St. Peter had been buried. So what he did was he took 800 men, and about 2 years, he removed millions of pounds of dirt from the hill and brought them over here to level this hill out and build the first basilica on the very spot where St. Peter had been buried.
For nearly 3 centuries, the flame of faith had burned in Rome. It had flickered at times, but it had never gone out. And gradually it burned brighter and hotter, so bright and hot, finally, that the emperor himself had felt its heat and bowed before it. With the conversion of Constantine, Christianity experienced a remarkable reversal of fortune. No longer would its power be merely spiritual. The Christian church in Rome would become a mighty political and military force, and its power would be wielded single-handedly by the Bishop of Rome, the Pope.
Tonight,
The Pope is perhaps the world's last great monarch, and the Vatican is his kingdom. Here, sheltered by ancient walls and battlements, surrounded by regal splendor, he receives the leaders of the world.
You may be at the Vatican one day and there's a great stir out in the courtyard with the different vehicles being moved and so on, and it's Yeltsin come to visit. You may be with Madeleine Albright of our State Department going to visit.
I guess the way to think about the Pope is that he doesn't have to answer to anybody. He's the Pope. He's the man. But he, in American terms, I think you look at him as being a sense the chief executive, his own legislature, and his own judicial court. He's all 3 of our branches of government rolled up into one.
Some 400 people live in Vatican City. Another 3,000 or so work within its walls. All of them are here in the service of the Pope. For him, they guard the Vatican's entrances. They tend and manicure its gardens. They polish the floors. They broadcast the message. For centuries, the entire Vatican has revolved around the Pope. At times, it seems, the world itself revolves around this spot. Even today, the world's most powerful leaders come to the Vatican seeking the Pope's blessing. Sometimes his spiritual blessing, always his political blessing. Even the most cynical politician knows that the Pope, with nearly 1 billion followers, wields remarkable power in global affairs. That power dates back to a dramatic event that unfolded here 1,200 years ago. It was Christmas Day in the year 800. At the Vatican, a crowd gathered for Mass. Suddenly, the basilica's doors swung open. Pope Leo III and his retinue entered, accompanied by a regal-looking foreigner. His name was Charlemagne, Charles the Great. Charlemagne had driven Germanic invaders out of Italy and gave most of the reclaimed territory to the Church. Now the Church would give something back. Charlemagne knelt, Pope Leo crowned him, and invented a new title for him. The Pope proclaimed Charlemagne the Emperor of the West. it was an unprecedented act on the Pope's part, one calculated to raise his own standing as well.
The event itself, but especially in the later myths that grew up around it, was a crucial event in Western history. First of all, here now for the first time, a pope is crowning an emperor, really determining who the emperor will be.
The coronation of Charlemagne at the altar of St. Peter's marked a milestone in the power and prestige of the popes. A marriage of church and state that endures to this day. There is no wall of separation between church and state in the Vatican, only walls of protection for both. Those walls and the power within have been tested many times. The first time pitted a strong-willed pope against a powerful king. It came to a head in the year 1077 at a snowbound castle high in the Italian Alps.
The first real assertion of papal sovereignty over secular rulers comes with the Pope Gregory VII. Gregory VII is a very determined and some would say inflexible reformer. And it is his idea that the Pope is not only the ruler and leader of the church's realm in the world, but of the entire world. And he actually says that the Pope is the highest in the world, that all princes should kiss his feet.
Pope Gregory's claim to supreme worldly power angered the King of Germany, Henry IV. King Henry challenged the Pope, calling him a false monk. Pope Gregory retaliated with all his force. He excommunicated King Henry. He also declared him unfit in the eyes of God to rule. King Henry backed down and humbled himself. He struggled through snowdrifts to reach the Pope's retreat in the Alps. For 3 days in January, the King of Germany stood barefoot in the snow, pleading for the Pope's pardon.
What drove him to seek out the Pope in the snow was not necessarily his guilty conscience, but the fact that all of his nobles refused to obey him because he had been excommunicated. They used, in other words, the papal excommunication for their own political purposes.
7 years later, secure in his power, King Henry had his revenge. He marched on Rome, ousted Pope Gregory, and had his own pope installed. Then he had himself crowned Holy Roman Emperor. Here, a half-mile outside the Vatican, is the Castle St. Angelo, an impregnable fortress that has played a prominent role in Vatican power struggles. Castle St. Angelo was built in the 2nd century by the pagan Emperor Hadrian as a grand tomb for himself. But gradually, Hadrian's tomb was transformed into a papal refuge, surrounded by battlements, topped with lavish living quarters, and most important, joined directly to the papal palace by a protected escape corridor built in the Middle Ages. In the year 1527, Pope Clement VII found himself running for his life down the emergency escape corridor. Clement had deceived the Habsburg Emperor Charles V by holding secret talks with France. Furious, Charles sent an army to Rome, and the troops, unpaid mercenaries, sacked Rome ruthlessly. One of their first targets was Pope Clement's palace. The Pope was guarded by Swiss mercenaries, the forerunners of today's Swiss guards.
He and his Swiss guards fought their way down this corridor, this very small corridor, at great loss of life to the guards. There were the guards with pikes in front and a group in back, and they simply fought their way all the way down the corridor to get to the Castello Sant'Angelo to avoid Clement VII being taken prisoner.
147 of the Pope's 200 guards were killed. But their heroic combat got Pope Clement to safety inside the massive fortress. Sometimes even the Castle St. Angelo didn't seem safe enough. During the 14th century, Italy was in turmoil and Rome was in chaos. Italian cities waged war on one another, and powerful Roman families bought, bribed, or butchered their way onto the throne of St. Peter. Against that backdrop, the papacy took a remarkable step. a step 400 miles long, all the way to France. A French pope had been elected. He refused to trade the comforts of France for the dangers of Rome. Besides, the French king, Philip IV, was powerful. Better to keep him as a powerful friend close at hand. Turning its back on the Vatican, the papacy settled into Avignon, a walled fortress town in southern France surrounded by rich papal territory. There, a series of French popes built a lavish palace on the banks of the Rhone and devoured the delights of Provence for nearly a century. It was a luxurious, self-imposed exile that came to be called the Babylonian captivity.
Avignon was a very pleasant city. If you've visited the papal palace there, you see how magnificent it is. Why would the popes want to go back to that malaria-ridden, dangerous city on the banks of the Tiber? From then on, it was just a series of excuses, really, for the popes not to go to Rome. It was just a domani, tomorrow, we'll do it tomorrow sort of situation.
The papal palace in Avignon boasted a chapel with soaring vaults, a grand staircase leading up to reception halls, cloistered courtyards and tranquil gardens. But while the popes frolicked in Avignon, more trouble was brewing in Italy. A bitter power struggle erupted between church factions in Avignon and Rome. Each city claimed to house the true pope. At the height of the struggle, 3 popes fought for power, each one denouncing and excommunicating the others. Finally, after decades of uncivil war, church leaders settled on a single pope and a single residence, the Vatican. The Vatican's most famous landmark is also its supreme symbol, St. Peter's Basilica. The facade of St. Peter's is immense, as big as a football field. Its mighty dome, one of the greatest on Earth, soars 450 feet into the sky, proclaiming St. Peter's presence for miles around. Piazza San Pietro, St. Peter's Square, is anything but square. Seen from above, the colonnade that frames it resembles a huge keyhole. On Wednesdays and Sundays, thousands jam the square for the Pope's regular appearances. On Sundays, he speaks from a window in the papal palace. But on Wednesdays, he mingles with the crowd in the piazza below. This vast gathering place was created 3.5 centuries ago by the architect Gian Lorenzo Bernini. The colonnade's 284 columns were quarried from travertine, a stone favored by